Subscribe to keep this channel alive. On the 1st of February 1587 at Greenwich Palace, Queen Elizabeth I sent for her secretary, William Davison, and asked him to bring her a single piece of parchment. She read it. She signed it. Then she told him to hold on to it, not to seal it, not to send it anywhere, not yet. 7 days later, Mary, Queen of Scots, was dead at Fotheringhay Castle, her head separated from her body in front of a room of witnesses. 9 days after that, William Davison was in the Tower of London, arrested, tried, and fined for a crime the Queen herself had ordered him to commit. He would spend the rest of his life paying for a piece of paper she signed with her own hand, and then claimed she never meant to use. This isn't the story you already know. The doomed queen, the Catholic martyr, the cousin Elizabeth couldn't bring herself to kill. This is the story of the paperwork behind that killing, a forged sentence slipped into a letter, a spy network that built its own evidence, and a secretary who took the fall so his queen wouldn't have to. Here's the part most retellings skip. Mary wasn't convicted on the strength of a rebellion or a confession or a body. She was convicted on the strength of a letter written in cipher, intercepted before it reached its recipient, decoded by a government cryptographer, and then edited by that same government before it was allowed to continue on its way. The forgery is not a theory picked up from a conspiracy forum. It's in the historical record. The man who added the extra sentence to Mary's letter, the sentence that sealed her fate, was Thomas Phelippes, Sir Francis Walsingham's chief codebreaker, acting on Walsingham's orders. Historians studying the surviving cipher have confirmed the handwriting and the ink don't match the rest of Mary's letter. Someone else wrote that final passage. It just wasn't written to look that way at the time. To understand how a government could get away with editing a queen's mail and using it to convict her, you have to understand who was managing the operation and who was left holding the bag while it was over. Mary was a queen before she could walk. She inherited the throne of Scotland at 6 days old after her father died following a defeat to the English. She was raised in France, married the future King of France at 15, and was widowed at 18. When she returned to Scotland to rule in person, she found a country that didn't much want her. Protestant, suspicious of her French upbringing, and increasingly hostile to the idea of a Catholic queen who had a stronger genealogical claim to the English throne than Elizabeth's own council was comfortable with. That claim was the entire problem. Mary was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII of England. To English Catholics who considered Elizabeth an illegitimate heretic, Mary wasn't a foreign queen. She was the rightful one. By 1568, Mary's own nobility had turned on her. Accused of complicity in her second husband's murder and forced to abdicate in favor of her 1-year-old son, she fled south across the border, expecting protection from her cousin Elizabeth. She got 19 years of house arrest instead. Elizabeth never dared execute her outright, and she never fully released her either. Mary was too dangerous to free and too royal to quietly kill. So she waited, moved from castle to castle, while every Catholic plot in Europe that wanted Elizabeth gone started looking at Mary as the replacement. And there were plots. The Ridolfi conspiracy in 1571, the Throckmorton conspiracy in 1583, each one uncovered before it could get anywhere, and each one landing Mary in slightly closer confinement with slightly less access to the outside world. By the time she was moved to Chartley Hall in the winter of 1585, she was cut off almost completely. No visitors, no unsupervised letters, watched constantly by her jailer, Sir Amias Powlett, a man who made no secret of his contempt for her. Elizabeth's spymaster, Francis Walsingham, understood something his queen didn't want to say out loud. As long as Mary was alive, the plots would never stop, because Mary didn't have to plan them herself, she just had to exist as the alternative. So, instead of waiting for the next conspiracy to surface on its own, Walsingham decided to build the conditions for one and control every part of it from the inside. By late 1585, Walsingham had a man inside Mary's world. Gilbert Giffard was a young Catholic courier, trusted by Mary's allies in France and secretly working for Walsingham. Giffard arranged a new communication channel for Mary, hidden letters smuggled in and out of her prison at Chartley Hall, hidden inside the cork of a beer barrel. Mary believed she'd finally found a secure line to the outside world. What she'd actually found was a mailbox Walsingham owned outright. Every letter that went into that barrel was intercepted, copied, and resealed before it ever reached her. Every letter that came out went straight to Thomas Phelippes for decoding before it was allowed to continue. In the spring of 1586, a young English Catholic named Anthony Babington began organizing a plot with a group of friends: assassinate Elizabeth, free Mary, and put her on the English throne with the backing of a foreign invasion. Babington wrote to Mary through the beer barrel channel, laying out the plan. What most people never learned about the Babington Plot is that Walsingham likely knew about it before Babington had finished recruiting for it. He didn't need to stop the plot. He needed Mary's own words, in her own hand, agreeing to it. On the 17th of July, 1586, Mary replied. She didn't write the letter herself. Like most correspondence of hers, it was dictated to her secretary and put into cipher, but the content was hers. She didn't explicitly order Elizabeth's murder. She didn't need to. She acknowledged the plan, asked for details on how it would be carried out, and made clear she expected to be freed once it succeeded. Phelippes decoded the letter within days. Legally, it was already damaging. Mary had engaged with a plan to kill her cousin and free herself by force. But Walsingham wanted more. He wanted names. Convicting Mary alone would remove one problem. Convicting her alongside a documented network of English co-conspirators would remove the argument, made for 19 years by her supporters, that she was simply a prisoner with no real followers left in England. Here's the detail that separates this case from ordinary Elizabethan spycraft. Walsingham didn't just want to catch the plotters. He needed Babington to hand over their names voluntarily, in writing, so that nobody could later claim the confession had been extracted under duress. And he needed that confession to look like it had come from Mary's own request. So, before the letter was passed to Babington, Phelippes added a postscript, written in Mary's own cipher, to look as though it had come from her, asking Babington to identify the men involved in the plan. Babington had no reason to suspect the request hadn't come from Mary. He wrote back with a full list of names. If you're finding this rabbit hole as strange as it deserves to be, this is a good moment to hit subscribe. The rest of this story only gets stranger from here, and we cover cases like this every week. Walsingham now had everything he needed. Babington and his co-conspirators were arrested, convicted, and executed in September of 1586, publicly, and with a level of brutality that even Elizabeth reportedly found excessive enough to order softened for the second group of executions carried out the following day. Mary was arrested that August and moved to Fotheringhay Castle to stand trial in October. The trial itself was not what you'd picture. There was no jury of her peers, because peers of a foreign queen didn't exist under English law. There was a commission of English noblemen appointed by Elizabeth, and Mary was denied legal counsel to prepare her defense. She was shown the decoded letters, including, presumably, the forged postscript she'd never actually written, and accused of conspiring in a plot to murder her cousin. Mary's defense was that Walsingham's spies were men of, in her words, doubtful credit, untrustworthy witnesses who had built an entrapment and then testified to its success. She wasn't wrong about the entrapment. She had no way to prove it and no lawyer to help her try. Think about what that actually means. The government that intercepted her mail also copied it, edited it, and then presented the edited version as evidence at a trial it had also organized. There was no independent judge, no defense counsel, no cross-examination of the men who'd built the case. The commission wasn't there to determine whether Mary was guilty. It was there to make her guilt official. The commission found her guilty. On the 25th of October, 1586, Mary, Queen of Scots, was formally condemned to death. Elizabeth still wouldn't sign. For 3.5 months, the warrant sat unsigned. Elizabeth reportedly told her advisors she wished Mary's jailers would simply take care of the problem quietly, without a formal execution she'd have to answer for. A suggestion her jailer, Sir Amias Paulet, refused to act on. Elizabeth needed Mary dead. She did not want to be the one who killed her. Those two positions are not compatible, and the way she resolved the contradiction is the part of this story almost nobody tells. On the 1st of February, 1587, the scene you heard at the start of this video, Elizabeth finally signed the warrant. She handed it to William Davison and told him to hold it. Multiple accounts from the time describe her instructing him not to let the warrant out of his possession without further word from her. Davison gave it to Lord Burghley. The Privy Council, without waiting for Elizabeth's explicit final word, decided among themselves to send the warrant to Fotheringhay immediately, before the Queen could change her mind again. On the 8th of February, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was formally condemned to death. In the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle, in front of roughly 300 witnesses. She wore black on the walk-in, and, according to accounts written down at the time, was found to be wearing a deep red underlayer once the black outer garments were removed at the block, red being the liturgical color of Catholic martyrdom. Whether that was a deliberate final statement or simply the fashion of a devout Catholic queen, her supporters treated it as the former, and the image spread across Catholic Europe within weeks. Eyewitness accounts described an execution that did not go cleanly. The executioner needed more than a single strike to finish the task, a detail contemporaries recorded and later historians have never been able to soften. When the news reached Elizabeth 2 days later, she reacted exactly the way you'd expect from someone who had, in fact, signed the order herself. She was furious. She wore mourning. She insisted she had never intended for the warrant to actually be used, and her anger fell almost entirely on William Davison, who she claimed had disobeyed her explicit instruction not to release it. Davison was arrested and sent to the Tower of London within days. He was tried before the Star Chamber on the 28th of March, 1587, on charges of misprision and contempt, essentially exceeding his authority. He was acquitted of any intention to harm the Queen's interests, but was still fined 10,000 marks and imprisoned during Elizabeth's pleasure. He remained in the Tower until 1589. The fine effectively ruined him financially for the rest of his life, and he never held meaningful office again. Nobody who studied the case at the time believed Davison had acted alone or against instruction. Contemporary observers, including Elizabeth's own clerk, Robert Beale, were furious on Davison's behalf, recognizing the punishment for what it was, a queen protecting her own image by sacrificing the man who'd carried out her order. What most people never learned about this part of the story is that Elizabeth's own council had every reason to move fast without her. They'd watched her stall for 3.5 months after the sentence was passed. They knew that if they waited for one more direct order, she might delay again, or reverse herself entirely, the way she had with previous executions she'd approved and then tried to call back. Burghley and the council didn't disobey Elizabeth so much as they made a decision she'd created the conditions for and would never have to admit to making herself. So, where did everyone end up? William Davison never recovered his career or his finances. He spent the rest of his life effectively exiled from court, ruined by a warrant he hadn't written and hadn't chosen to send. Thomas Phelippes, the forger, faced no punishment at all. He continued working as one of England's most valuable cryptographers for years afterward. The man who physically altered a queen's letter to secure her conviction was never so much as questioned about it. Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, was 6 years old when his mother fled to England and had barely known her. When she was executed, he was 20 years old and ruling Scotland in his own right. He issued a formal protest. He did not break relations with England. He did not retaliate. 16 years later, in 1603, he inherited the English throne his mother had died trying to claim, becoming James I of England, the same crown worn by the son of the woman it had executed. In 1612, as king, James ordered his mother's remains moved from their original burial site at Peterborough Cathedral to Westminster Abbey, where they remain today, in a chapel directly across from the tomb of Elizabeth I, the cousin who signed the warrant and spent the rest of her life insisting she hadn't. The letter that convicted her wasn't fully hers. The warrant that killed her wasn't supposed to leave the room it was signed in, and the son who inherited her cause never once tried to avenge her. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to let me know in the comments.